All right, so as we alluded to, the first module of this course, we talked about research methods. And so you guys did your scientific critique, you got that back. Module 2 is talking about the careers, so we're kind of just touching upon the tail end of that. So module 3 of this course, as you know, is the foundations of kinesiology. The first foundation we'll talk about here is sports nutrition. But since it's been so long, since I've actually been in front of you presenting, right? We've had 2 weeks straight of guest speakers. You probably forgot that I love coffee. I love teaching you guys about coffee. Maybe you just had lunch, a little bit sleepy, a little bit tired. So I figured if I talk about coffee, just by thinking about having caffeine might perk you up just a little bit here. So a real quick thing I'll teach you about coffee today is, well, how much coffee should you actually use for a given volume of water? And this will actually segue nicely into one of your assignments coming up, as you'll see. So a typical coffee to water ratio, they roughly estimate around 2 tablespoons of coffee grounds to about 6 ounces of water. And this will also be very dependent upon what apparatus you ultimately use, whether it's a drip coffee maker, an AeroPress, MX. We'll talk about more of those as the semester goes along. But as you know, I'm a scientist, so I have to be very precise about how much coffee and how much water I actually use. So to really be precise, you basically say about 1 gram of coffee for every 16 mLs of water. And to make this really simple, you may remember back to your chemistry class that you took, that 1 ml is equal to 1 gram. So you can actually go and put this on a scale. This is actually what individuals will do. You'll put your coffee apparatus onto a scale and actually measure out the water and measure out the coffee beans that you ultimately will utilize. So if you go into my kitchen, you'll actually see something like this. This is actually how I weigh out my coffee beans in the morning. If you remember back at the beginning of the semester, we talked about a nutritional assignment that you guys will have, and it's coming up soon. I'll kind of talk about the details of that. But to do that nutrition assignment, you need to actually purchase a little scale like this. But I advocate don't purchase this little scale. And this happened last semester. So do your nutrition log to actually record the foods that you're going to eat. It's good to use a food scale, but if it's too small, you're not going to be able to weigh anything. And so I have some individuals buy this scale. If you just put a bowl or plate onto a scale like this, it's going to max it out. It's going to tear it out. You can't actually measure anything. It works great for measuring coffee beans. It works great for measuring little nuts. But if you want to purchase a scale that's a little bit bigger, I'll actually show you the link that I have embedded in your syllabus. So if you go back to your syllabus, you'll see a link to a nutrition scale on Amazon.com. $10, $12, real simple. Typically you want something that has about 11-pound capacity on there. That way you can put a bowl on there, you can put a plate, put some food on top of it, and get a pretty accurate representation of the food that ultimately you're taking in. All right, so back to the good old kinesiology. So chapter 6, sports nutrition. I got to tell you, when it comes to nutrition stuff, we talk about different professionals who actually deal with nutrition. And so this is a slide that you guys saw previously. You don't need to write all this down. You've seen this in chapter 11 slides before. We talked about as a career going into being a nutrition professional. What does that ultimately entail? Being a dietitian. And so these are just some of the things that we talked about previously. You've already seen this, right? They assess the nutritional needs of individuals. They develop and assist with the implementation of nutritional programs. They advise patients and clients on health and disease-related conditions. And they deal with all these different sorts of clinical populations. People who are dealing with weight loss, with things like diabetes, controlling blood pressure, controlling cholesterol. Because as we'll talk about here, the food that ultimately you take in has a pretty big influence on all these different factors, right? The food that you take in will minimize or maximize your potential to have some different chronic diseases. And being a nutritionist, you can work in a whole host of different settings. You can work in a clinical setting, like in a hospital. You can have your own business. It could be an online business, or it can be an in-person business. So this is the segue into one of your last guest speakers that we have coming on the 24th, so the week after we get back. Holly Marshall is a good friend of mine. She actually is a nutritionist. So she'll come in and kind of talk to you about that profession. Now, as Colin alluded to last week, he was talking about nutrition professionals. And he said that he could actually prescribe nutrition, but yet he isn't a nutritionist, but he has a certain credential and certain degrees to do that. So here in California, it's very unique who can give out nutrition advice, and it's going to be very state dependent. So if you're in Nevada, like Morgan's from, I'm not exactly sure what the regulations are ultimately there in regards to actually giving out nutrition advice. But here in California, just having certain credentials will allow you to do that. In some other states like Florida, to give nutrition advice, you actually have to be an RD, the registered dietitian. So go through an approved accredited program through dietetics. Then go and do a pretty significant internship. And after you do that, then you can actually go and actually prescribe an actual food plan to people. So Holly will actually tell you about her story, how she sort of got into the field. This is her website, wholehogpaleo.com. If you're interested in looking at different pictures of food every time on her Instagram, probably 3 times a day she posts what she's eating on Instagram, so it's kind of fun to look at her sort of stuff out there. She actually has a podcast as well called The Nourishing Buzz. Her and a friend of hers get together once a week and have this podcast. So it's pretty interesting, and she'll talk about what her job entails as a nutritionist. And guess what? A lot of her job isn't dealing with nutrition. It's actually dealing with social media, right? That's actually a big part, and I kind of alluded to this, I think, to you guys previously. This is something you'll never have to think about, at least my generation. Before, when I was an undergrad, none of my professors were telling me you need to be up on social media and how to make a social media presence. But this is something you guys need to think about for building your own business as a physical therapist, as a personal trainer, as a chiropractor, right? You get your message out there and put a public image that ultimately is out there. So these are things that she'll talk about. She'll talk about the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist, because she is a nutritionist. She's not a dietitian. Spoiler alert, she does not have a background in kinesiology. She has a background in architecture. But it can still apply to you, because basically with your degree in kinesiology, you're not going to be able to go and become a nutritionist. You're going to have to go and get some sort of other specialization on top of that to do that. And then one of the things that she'll talk about as well, which I love, are different diets out there, different hot topics that are in the world of nutrition. And there's a whole host of different diets that are out there. We have things like a keto diet or the ketogenic diet, vegetarian diet, and a vegetarian diet can take a whole host of different forms. There's some people who will completely eschew any sort of animal source whatsoever, sort of a vegan. We have other people who will maybe include eggs or dairy, lacto-vegetarian, ovo-lacto-vegetarian, pesco-vegetarian, semi-vegetarian. Didn't think that many types of different vegetarians, but ultimately there are. And there's some other diets out there as well. IIFYM. Who's heard of IIFYM? Crickets, just like I thought. IIFYM, if it fits your macros. If it fits your macros. So what does that mean? Basically, in the world of nutrition, as we'll talk about coming up here, is we look at 6 different essential nutrients. We have your macronutrients, your carbohydrates, your fats, and your proteins. And then we have your micronutrients, your vitamins, your minerals, and the last thing is going to be your water. So people who prescribe to this diet of IIFYM, they basically will say, okay, I know over the course of 24 hours, I want to take in 100 grams of protein, 200 grams of carbohydrate, and 100 grams of fat. I'm pulling those numbers out of thin air right now. But basically what somebody would say is, okay, I'm going to eat certain foods that'll make sure that I hit those certain macronutrients. Doesn't matter what the food is. Doesn't matter if it's a cheeseburger, doesn't matter if it's Pop-Tarts, doesn't matter if it's Lucky Charms. As long as it fits those different macronutrients, I get this many carbs, this many protein, this many fat, then it fits my dietary regimen. That's one different diet that's out there. I'm not saying whether it's good or bad. These are things that are out there that you guys going into the fitness field will realize this is what people are going to come to you saying. They're going to come to you saying, hey, I heard about IIFYM. Should I do that diet? And you need to make sure that you understand what that is and what that entails to give an accurate representation and give them accurate advice. And the last thing as well would be something like a paleo diet or the primal diet. Anybody heard of the paleo primal diet? So hopefully, since many of you have, when you see this cartoon, I'll get a little chuckle out of this. If you don't know what the paleo diet is, and you look at this cartoon, it doesn't make sense to you, well, stay tuned because Holly will explain the paleo diet. Basically, a diet that's pretty big emphasis on whole foods, a lot of meat, nuts, seeds, and things of that nature. So this is just poking fun at the fact that the paleo diet, somebody took it just a little too far, All right, so this is the slide that we've seen previously, right? This sort of sets the stage for the foundations of kinesiology. And so this whole module of the course is basically trying to get you through that you can understand each of these different components. Now you will go and take courses in exercise physiology. You will go and take a whole course in sports psychology. Like I've alluded to before, I cannot teach you everything you're going to learn in those courses. My job here in this course is to basically just kind of give you a big picture overview of what you're going to learn as you go through and take those courses. And I'll throw in my fun little tidbits about each of those areas that I think are unique about each of those areas as well. And so I'll talk about exercise physiology, we'll talk about clinical exercise physiology, we'll talk about biomechanics as well. Luckily, you already had your guest speaker, Dr. Stephen Winter. He came in and talked to you about athletic training. So I'm not going to talk to you about athletic training because I'm not an athletic trainer. That's why I brought him in to teach you about that field. Sports psychology, I'm not a psychologist. I'm the complete and utter opposite of a psychologist, right? I'm a physiologist. The joke in the world of physiology is we chop the head off. We don't look at anything from here up. We look at everything from the here down. So I'm not going to talk to you about sports psychology. But last semester I had a guest speaker come in, Dr. Glenn Brassington, who's actually here at Sonoma State in the psychology department. And he basically came in and talked about the field of sports psychology. And so whether we strike or not, ultimately I'll either play back that video in class or I'll play back that video for you guys to watch on Moodle. And I'll give you an email about how to do that as well. And we'll talk about motor behavior, which is a fun topic. So today we're going to be looking at nutrition. Nutrition is near and dear to my heart. As an undergrad, my degree was in exercise science, human performance, and I actually got a minor in nutrition. I took a bunch of courses in my master's degree in nutrition. I even took even more courses in nutrition in my PhD. So needless to say, I really like nutrition. And as somebody who wrestled in high school, I learned about nutrition at a very, very early age. And that was something that I realized, competing in that sport, there is sort of a weight component to that sport, which not many other sports actually have. So I had to try to figure out, well, how can I minimize my body weight, yet still maximize my performance? So that started me off pretty early on, trying to figure out what foods go in my body, and what are the best foods that I'm supposed to put into my body to fuel it to perform adequately. So it sort of begs this question, and I'll kind of just stop for a second and ask you guys this. What is nutrition? We throw that word around all the time, right? The second you see the word, you have an idea what nutrition is. But now if I actually ask you, right now on your piece of paper, define nutrition, what would you write down? Could you articulate to me what nutrition is? Just think about that for a second. And that's the question I ask. Any takers? What is nutrition? How would you define nutrition to me, to your friends, to your family, to your parents, to your clients? Without using the word nutrition. Yeah, that's the toughest part, right? Nick, what foods do you eat? I like it, right? Short, sweet, kind of makes sense. He didn't use the word nutrition, so A+, excellent. That would be nutrition. Your textbook gives a really good definition. One of these definitions, you read it and you say, yeah, that is nutrition, right? Nutrition, defined as the science that interprets the connection between food and the function of the living organism. Just chew on that for a second. Nutrition humor? Anybody? No? Oh, thanks. I appreciate it. All right. Nutrition, defined as a science that interprets the connection between food and the function of the living organism. Pretty good working definition for what nutrition ultimately is. And so nutrition as a field has a whole host of subdisciplines. So if you come to me, you come to my office hours, you say, Dr. Sollanek, I want to go into nutrition. I'm going to say, that's great. I'm going to say, what area of nutrition do you ultimately want to go into? Because you have a lot of different options. There's a lot of different. Nutrition itself is almost an umbrella term. And you could fall into a bunch of different areas. For example, you can go into clinical nutrition. You can go into nutritional biochemistry, community nutrition. When I say I like nutrition, personally, I like this guy right here, nutritional biochemistry. I like to look at how basically foods interact with the body and what sort of different things they modulate within this physiological system. But we have even more areas as well. We have food science nutrition, nutritional management, and nutritional counseling. So there's a whole realm of different possibilities that you could go into in nutrition. And your guest speaker, Holly Marshall, will kind of allude to where she is and some of the paths that she's taken, because she's actually working in a couple of different areas of nutrition as well. So let's take this another step further. Let's now apply this to the field of kinesiology. So we just talked about nutrition as a big picture overview. But now what about exercise and sports nutrition? Because that's actually the title of your textbook. That's chapter 6. It is sports nutrition. So here's your definition of sports nutrition, which I love. Promotion of optimal intake of nutrients for tissue maintenance, repair, and growth, and for providing the body with sufficient energy without an energy excess, or an excess of energy intake. Now I thought about just putting this thing up here and just talking about this for the entire class, because I could. There is so much information packed within that one sentence that I could talk easily for an hour and a half just upon that, but I'll spare you that. We'll go through a couple of different things on top of that. But you could break this down into each thing. Promotion of optimal intake of nutrients. Well, that's the first thing. What is optimal nutrients? We'll kind of define what optimal ultimately is. And as you'll see, there is no such thing as optimal. There is no perfect food. There is no perfect diet. For tissue maintenance, we need to maintain tissue. We need to maintain tissue because we have athletic populations who are out there who are constantly exercising and breaking down skeletal muscle tissue. They need to rebuild it. So just like going out there, we talked before about delayed onset muscle soreness. That soreness that you feel after an exercise bout. And typically that is a result of, what's delayed onset muscle soreness a result of?
Micro tears.
Yeah, micro tears. Micro tears, which subsequently lead to swelling of the muscle, which then stretches those nerves. Exactly. So if you're going out and doing a hard exercise bout, yeah, you're actually breaking down your skeletal muscle tissue. Or if you break it down, then you ultimately need time to build it back up. And how do you build it back up? If you take a brick wall, you build it down, you want to rebuild a brick wall, what do you need? You need some bricks, right? Same thing, you break down muscle tissue, and then you need to keep your body with building blocks to build it back up. The protein, the carbohydrates, the fat, vitamins, and minerals, that sort of thing. And then we have this little caveat here though, without an excess of energy intake. So we have that star with a little bit of asterisk. And the reason we have an asterisk is because in the world of sports and exercise, we need to think about there are athletic populations out there who actually struggle to maintain weight. We have athletic populations out there who struggle to actually maintain a caloric surplus. From a population point of view, from a health point of view, we don't ever talk about excess energy in this regard, right? It's always about weight loss. We're trying to make sure people don't eat enough because we don't want them to become obese. When it comes to athletic populations, that is a dire concern. As I'll show you in a couple slides here, we have athletic populations, people who compete in sports like bodybuilding, in extreme endurance sports, cycling, Tour de France, elite Olympic swimmers. Their caloric intakes are astronomical. These people cannot take in enough calories to sustain their body mass as they go through. And so when we look at this notion of optimal nutrient intake, we can look at it from two different points of view. And this is sort of how this course will sort of break down, this chapter will break down. We look at it from a health perspective, and then we look at nutrition from an exercise, sports, performance perspective. But luckily, the two roads, as parallel as they are, they do sort of intersect at the end of the day. So optimal nutrients for health typically are also optimal nutrients for sports and performance, which makes it kind of convenient, kind of fun in that regard. So optimal nutrients will reduce our risks of certain diseases, reduce our risk of cardiovascular disease, different types of cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, so on and so forth. And optimal nutrient intake, as we alluded to as well, it'll enhance your sports and athletic participation. For years, we've known that eating certain foods and different micronutrients and macronutrient composition can affect ultimately your performance. And we'll talk about that coming up here. And just real quickly, we always throw in these words. I want to make sure that we actually differentiate them and realize that they are sort of a different beast. We throw in the word diet, we throw in the word nutrition. Most of the time we use them sort of interchangeably. And they can be used pretty interchangeably, right? Particularly when you hear the word diet, we don't usually think about all the food that you typically eat. We always think about diet in regards to restriction, right? Oh, tomorrow I'm going to start my diet. Well, no. You have a diet right now, right? What is your diet? Your diet is all the food that you eat every day. That is your diet. That is your nutrition. They are the same. But as a society, we always use the word diet sort of in a negative connotation in the fact that you're restricting, when really it shouldn't be. Diet should really just encompass everything that you take in. And so I want to make sure that we cover that. Versus in nutrition, describe all the aspects related to your food consumption. As Nick defined, when I said, what is nutrition? Hey, it's the food you consume. Well, yeah, that is nutrition. We just gave a little bit more of a scientific definition on your slide previous to that. There's other ways that we can think about nutrition as well, though. We can think about it as the food you take in. We can think about it as the macronutrients, the micronutrients, IFYM, and all these sorts of things. One way that one of my old professors used to talk about food, and I loved it, and I want to make sure I articulated it to you. You guys saw this slide previously. So Dr. Finn, one of my mentors when I was an undergrad, and these are some of the things that I talked about before that she kind of told me. Be careful who you tell you're a kinesiology major. Because anytime you say you're a kinesiology major, they always say, hey, what do you think about this exercise? Or what do you think about this food? So this is why we're covering this topic right now, so that you can have a little bit more knowledge about different diets and things that are out there. You have to practice what you preach. There's always time for the things that you put first. And here's the thing that she used to always say. And people would always give her sort of like a raised eyebrow when she would say it. What fuel do you use? What fuel do you use? Unleaded, regular unleaded? No, she was talking about food, right? Because that's how she thought about food. She thought about it as fuel. It wasn't, oh, what are you eating that tastes good? Oh, I'm in the mood for like a Snickers bar or a double cheeseburger. No. What do you need? What macronutrients do you need to provide for the energy that you need to go and compete in the sport that you're doing? Are you doing plyometric training? Are you doing resistance training? Are you doing endurance exercise training? All those will differentiate and need a different sort of fuel source. So I always like that aspect of fuel. Food is fuel. That's ultimately what it's doing for your body. Which then leads to the next question, though. What is the best fuel, right? That's probably what you walked in the door thing, where you say, oh, great, today we're covering sports nutrition. Dr. Sollanek's going to tell me what is the best fuel sources to eat. Well, I hate to break it to you. You don't want to eat this. That's not going to do your body very good. It works well in your car, but not in the physiological system. Spinach, it could be a good one. Definitely a good one. Packed with some different micronutrients and things like that that your body will need, some of those essential nutrients. So just kind of Googling around quickly, what is the best fuel? What is the best diet that's out there? And so one of the guest speakers that I had last week, he came to my morning class. He didn't come to the afternoon class, so you guys had Colin come and speak in the afternoon. In the morning class, I had Coach Ryan Parker, who owns a CrossFit gym. And so I'll put that video up, or if we're in class, we'll put the video, so you'll learn a little bit more about what CrossFit is and things like that. But so in the world of CrossFit, they actually went out and defined fitness in 100 words. And as part of this 100 words, they actually had a component up there that related to diet, what they thought was the optimal diet. I thought it was a good starting spot, a good place just to start the conversation about what is the optimal fuel to actually consume. And here's what they said. Eat meat and vegetables, nuts and seeds, some fruit, a little starch, and no added sugar. I put this in. They actually did not have the added in there. They say no sugar. But as hopefully you know that there is some sugar in fruit. There is some sugar in vegetables. So when people say, oh, I don't have sugar, you should really be saying, well, I don't have added sugar, right? I'm not just taking a teaspoon, taking the white stuff and drizzling it on my food. There's natural food in everything. There's natural sugar in all the foods that you naturally eat. And keep intake to levels that will support exercise, but not body fat. Again, it always goes back to making sure you're regulating the amount of calories that you're taking in. But again, some sports we may want a caloric surplus, as we'll talk about coming up here for a bit. So it seems pretty good. Seems pretty foundational, right? Nothing wrong, glaringly wrong that's jumping out at me saying, that sounds awful. But is it missing something? Are there other healthy foods that are kind of jumping to your mind? You're saying, well, what about X, Y, Z? Well, what's X, Y, Z? You got meat, vegetables, nuts, seeds, fruit, a little starch. Water, okay. Yeah. No recommendations about water. It is one of the 6 essential nutrients that we talk about, water.
Dairy.
Dairy. Yeah, no dairy. No emphasis on whole grains and things of that nature. What about whole grains? What about dairy? What about tubers? What's a tuber?
Root, right? Type of root.
It's a root. Do you eat tubers?
I don't, but yeah.
You don't?
I don't think so.
You like potatoes?
Yeah.
You eat potatoes?
Tuber?
You eat tubers. There's your useless piece of information for the day. A potato is a tuber. Another useless piece of information, a peanut is not a nut. It's a legume. Did you not know that? Most people will eat tubers. So are you telling me that things like whole grains, dairy, and potatoes, tubers, are you saying those are not optimal fuel? So every diet is always going to be a little bit different, right? Everybody's always going to have their own bias about what is the best fuel source that's out there. So optimal nutrient intake, it doesn't exist, right? There is no perfect food. There is no perfect diet. Because what's good for one person isn't always going to be good for another person. I'll give you some examples coming up here in a second. So nutrient intake, optimal nutrient intake will be dependent upon all these different factors that we're going to outline here. Age. We've learned quite a bit over the past couple decades that different individuals of different decades require different nutrients. When we look at things like protein intake, you guys are young, and guess what? You get a very robust anabolic response to protein. And you don't need a lot of it to get that response. But as you get older, you actually need more protein to get that same anabolic response. So when we have a geriatric population, if we're trying to stimulate protein synthesis in them to the maximum amount, we sometimes need to give them almost 2 or 3 times the amount of protein to get that same response. Older individuals' development not absorb the same amount of micronutrients. So we have a vitamin out there called vitamin B12. So as individuals get older and older, these geriatric populations, they cannot actually get as much B12 into their system, so they need a little bit more of it. So that would differentiate that optimal nutrient intake for different age populations. It varies. Physical activity levels. I think it goes without saying, but we need to say it. Somebody who's very active will probably have different nutritional requirements than somebody who's very inactive. I'll kind of give you some examples of this coming up in a couple slides. Gender. Gender will definitely have an impact on optimal nutrient intake. If you're a young lady out there thinking about getting pregnant, well, maybe we need to have a little bit more emphasis on things like folic acid to prevent spina bifida. Or maybe you are already pregnant, or you're a mother who's lactating and breastfeeding. We're going to have higher nutritional requirements in those different states than other individuals out there. There's a gender difference between optimal nutrient intake. Body size goes without saying, right? Sort of. Typically, the bigger the individual, probably more calories that they need. But then again, everybody has a different metabolism. There's some individuals who are pretty big and they have a pretty slow metabolism. And there's some people who are pretty small and they can have a pretty fast metabolism. So you just have to take those things with a grain of salt in there. And also various health conditions. So you get individuals who are diabetic or cancer patients, and they're going to have different optimal nutrient intake. I'll kind of do a quick little aside here. I'm actually currently in the midst of trying to start up a research study with a company out there that actually makes a beverage, a rehydration beverage, and it's specifically marketed towards cancer patients. So let me just tell you a quick little story here. You have a lot of clinical populations who become dehydrated. So if you're in the hospital, you become dehydrated, well, you need to give you more fluids to now rehydrate you. And we know that there's some fluids that rehydrate better than water. We have fluids like Gatorade, right, and Pedialyte. So we have things that have sugar, that have electrolytes, vitamins, minerals, and things like that, which are great for certain clinical populations. However, interestingly enough, cancer patients who are undergoing chemotherapy, chemotherapy is basically giving your body drugs to destroy the cells that are in your body, the dividing cells. So some of your dividing cells are like your hair. So that's why you see a lot of chemotherapy patients who are undergoing that treatment, they lose their hair. Or you have another cell in your body that's pretty susceptible to chemotherapy. It's the villi in your intestines. So a lot of these cancer patients who undergo chemotherapy get really bad diarrhea. So these people who have really bad diarrhea need more fluids. So now all of a sudden you have a patient, there's diarrhea, and now you give them some rehydration solution, you give them some Pedialyte, you give them some Gatorade. Problem is fixed, right? It actually makes it worse. Because they've had their villi are damaged, they can't actually absorb all that sugar. And it actually exacerbates their diarrhea. It makes it worse. So this company out there called Dietary actually now has a beverage where instead of using sugar, they actually use different amino acids. And so now I'm trying to do a study just trying to figure out, does that hydrate just as well in a normal population? Does it hydrate just as well as Gatorade and as Pedialyte? So that works for that population. That same beverage can also work pretty well for diabetic patients. Patients who can't control their blood sugar. Do you think I'm a dehydrated diabetic? Do you think I want to go give them tons of Gatorade or Pedialyte? Give them just tons of sugar? No. But if you have a beverage that has a lot of amino acids, that can fit the bill. Same thing if you have people trying to lose weight. Gatorade is an awful weight loss drink. Nothing but sugar. When I give them a beverage with just some amino acids, a way lower caloric intake, yet still give them a good rehydrating potential. Different optimal nutrients for different clinical populations. Pretty cool stuff, so stay tuned for that. So how does proper nutrition ultimately help an athlete? Well, it helps them in a bunch of different ways, and 4 different ways that we're going to outline here. The first is to maintain an appropriate training intensity. And this is pretty cool. This is where we have some fun stuff with nutritional intake coming up here. In the world of sports that we talked about, we have some pretty extreme events out there. One of which is something called the Tour de France. You guys heard of the Tour de France before? Massive bike race. You have the elite of the elite cyclists going out there. Lance Armstrong won it for a number of years. These guys go out, they ride their bikes for about 3 weeks straight. Technically, they're out there for 23 days, 21 of which they're actually riding their bike. And over the course of those 3 weeks, they end up covering about 2,100 miles. That's a lot of time in the saddle. And they're going over mountains. They're not going up hills. They're going up through the Swiss Alps, up and down and up and down. And so they did a study a couple of years back, a couple of decades ago. They tried to figure out how many calories are these athletes ultimately burning per day. And so I just kind of want to put this into perspective about how many calories some of these different athletes are ultimately trying to take in. So energy intake in the Tour de France. On a typical average day in the Tour de France, they took in 6,000 calories a day. 6,000 was the average. On some of the high days and some of the big ascents going up, they had taken 9,000. That's how many calories they were burning. Just to maintain weight, 9,000 calories. Do you know how many calories 9,000 calories is? Do you know how much food you have to eat to take in 9,000 calories? Well, this gentleman here asked for You Can Drop of mysportscience.com, a great website. I love it. I've preached it to you guys before. He wanted to make this graspable to you. So he broke it down and figured out how many cheeseburgers you'd have to eat to get 9,000 calories. How many cheeseburgers do you think you have to eat to get in 9,000 calories? Any estimates? 20. Good. A little higher.
35.
A little lower.
29. Wouldn't it depend on the burger?
Bingo! It depends upon the burger. So we have to figure out.
Contact grill burger, that's a lot of calories.
Depends upon the burger. So an average burger, you basically broke it down to be about 27 burgers. Cheeseburgers, to be exact. This is the caloric intake for somebody who's competing in the Tour de France on a high day. This is how much food they have to take in just to maintain weight. I guarantee if you eat one cheeseburger, you're not going to want to ride your bike afterwards, right? So this just puts it into perspective that we have some different athletic populations out there where it's a real struggle to make sure they get an adequate nutrition and maintain the appropriate exercise intensity. Because these guys are riding their bikes all day, and guess what they're doing? They're going to bed and they're waking up and they're riding their bike all again the next day, and the next day, and the next day. They don't have a week off to recover in between these bouts. So we need to make sure we get optimal nutrients into them with these insanely high caloric intakes. Other well-known individuals who've had very high caloric intakes. You guys ever hear of this gentleman here? Michael Phelps, right? Pretty well-known swimmer. Won a couple medals back in his day. 6 gold medals in 2004, 2 bronze, 8 gold medals in 2008, and even in 2012 here took gold and gold and a silver. And so when Michael Phelps was winning, especially back in 2008, maybe you saw this. I don't know, Martha, if you ever saw this. He actually did the interview. And in the interview, he started talking about his diet. And this went viral. This went everywhere. When people heard what Michael Phelps ate on a daily basis, jaws dropped. People thought, it's not true. It's not true. And then also people thought, wait, if that's what Michael Phelps is doing, that's got to be healthy. That was the problem. So it was actually estimated that Michael Phelps takes in 12,000 calories a day. This was in his heyday. This is when he was training 5, 6, 7 hours a day. I know it's a little fuzzy, so it might be a little bit tough to read here, but this is basically what he would eat on a given day. Massive breakfast, massive lunch, massive dinner, 4,000 calories apiece. And so he went out and he said this on the news. This was on a public interview on NBC or ABC, one of those things. And all of a sudden people started to think, hey, if Michael Phelps can eat a whole pizza for dinner with energy drinks, that's got to be good for you, right? He's Michael Phelps. He's a gold medalist. No. People look at Michael Phelps and say, wow, dude, he's shredded. He's 12,000 calories and he's shredded. Yeah, because he's burning through that many calories. So the moral of the story is don't go home and start eating a pizza because Michael Phelps or Dr. Sollanek said to eat this much. I'm trying to paint the example that we have some extreme athletes out there who have some extremely high nutrient requirements. And there's certain ways that they need to do that. Yeah, I'm not going to say that this is the healthiest diet out there. I mean, he actually would take in about 2,000 calories from just energy drinks alone. And the dietitians came out and they were livid. They were like, Michael, why are you saying this? And he's like, because that's the only way I can get in my calories, which is true. You want to take in 1,000 calories of other foodstuffs, you're going to be pretty significantly full. And I'll give you some examples of that coming up. So you need to make sure that you have the appropriate amount of fuel to actually maintain the appropriate intensity as you go forward. And all that fuel also will help with your recovery. Right? As we talked about going through these different exercise bouts, you are breaking down your skeletal muscle tissue, and it takes calories to actually rebuild that skeletal muscle tissue. And adequate nutrition is also going to enhance your energy production, which sort of piggybacks into point number 1 to make sure that we're maintaining the appropriate training intensity. And the last example I'll give, which is actually going to put those to shame in regards to caloric expenditure, is this last bullet point here. Helps develop skeletal muscle tissue. So another area of the exercise science field that we see blossoming is sort of a sport of bodybuilding, where individuals out there and they're trying to increase their lean mass, they're trying to make themselves as big as possible. And you guys heard Colin talk about that, right? He was saying how back in the day when he played college football, he weighed 260 pounds. And here he is standing in front of you, a very large man at 210 pounds, and yet he said he used to weigh 260 pounds. You know how much food he had to take in to get to that size, right? It's the same thing as these gentlemen are trying to do as well. It's astronomical amounts of food. And one of the most well-known individuals out there who takes in a pretty insane amount of calories is this gentleman here, Juan Morel. He's actually a current IFBB pro bodybuilder, just competed last weekend at the Arnold Classic. Didn't do too well, but he is known to have one of the most intense metabolisms out there. His metabolism is so insane that once a week, he'll take in 20,000 calories a day. That is not a typo, folks. That is not a typo. 20,000 calories a day. If you are so inclined, if you really want to see what 20,000 calories ultimately looks like, you can go to YouTube. You can see an entire day. They follow him because he used to say this on interviews. They say, I take in 20,000 calories a day. People say, you're lying. You can't do that. You become a fat mess if you eat 20,000 calories a day. Yeah, really? Come follow me. So he videotaped it. An entire day of him eating. Do you think that's an entire day of him eating chicken breast, broccoli, and rice? No. You're going to get a pretty big tummy ache to do that. So what does it consist of? Well, it consists of a lot of Five Guys, onion rings, a couple burgers, a lot of energy-dense foods, a lot of Baskin Robbins, and things like that. So again, I put this up here. Yeah, Lexi.
So you're saying how like they have really high metabolism, and so they have to eat a lot. Is their metabolism naturally that high, or is it like they're taking supplements?
Yes, that's a great question. And so for somebody like Juan Morel, it's sort of the trifecta in a sense. It's the trifecta of genetically blessed with a super high metabolism. He's doing some very high amounts of training as well. Guys in the gym probably lifting weights 3, 4, 5 hours a day. And yeah, there is some pharmaceutical enhancement. That is not natural. I'm not going to beat around the bush. And people know that. People know that in the sport of bodybuilding, it's sort of one of those things that you just don't talk about, but it's a given. That this is not natural. There are performance-enhancing drugs that are being used here, and yeah, that'll definitely rapidly expedite that sort of thing. But that's not to say that he wasn't genetically blessed with a really high metabolism to begin with as well. Okay, so how many calories do you need to take in? You do not need to take in 20,000 calories. You probably don't even need to take in 10,000 calories. The average individual, kind of toning this back now, going more towards that health side of it, the average individual typically takes in about 2,000 calories a day. About 2,000 calories. So what does that look like? I just showed you what 20,000 calories kind of looks like. I showed you what 10,000 calories or 12,000 calories look like. So what does 2,000 calories? Let's reset our rheostat here just a little bit. Well, here's option 1. That's 2,000 calories right there. Yeah, I know. And so with your food logs coming up, and I'll explain to you how you're going to do your food logs in a little bit, I was shocked, absolutely shocked last semester when I assigned this. How many students, I had 60 students between this class and my other class as I do this semester. I was shocked at how many students on a typical day would get almost all their calories from just one meal like this. You wake up, you have class at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, you probably miss breakfast, all of a sudden it's the middle of the day, maybe you got like a banana, something like that, and before you know it, at the end of the day, you stop at Chipotle, you get the double burrito, and boom, guess what, there it is, 2,000 calories. Cheeseburger, fry, and a soda, 2,000 calories. Wow. And that just goes right down, right? I mean, you can actually sit down and just eat that. But go and try and sit down and eat that all at once. That's also 2,000 calories. A little bit different, right? Looks a little bit healthier. Looks pretty typical, actually, what I would eat on a daily basis. Got some eggs, veggies, maybe some fruit for breakfast, some rice, veggies, some meat in there, some chicken, some turkey, something of that nature. Dinner, some more meat, veggie, maybe some tubers. I love those tubers. I get those potatoes in. And maybe some yogurt and some fruit, maybe some vegetables, some pita chips and hummus. But now if you try to eat all this at once, you'd have a massive stomach ache, but yet this goes right down. Why is that? We have a pretty big difference here in different macronutrients. Right? One of them has tons of fiber, one has very little fiber. One has tons of sugar, one doesn't have as much sugar. One has tons of micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, different phytonutrients, different antioxidants, things that we don't even know are good for us, but we think are good for us in there. And here, all stuff that we think is bad for us and it probably is bad for us, right? And so ultimately you may be trying to figure out, well, how do I know? How many calories should I take in on a daily basis? Well, the gold standard is you got to map it out. You got to actually look at how many calories you take in on a daily basis. And so to do this, we can do it in one or two different ways. So we have what's called the dietary recall, where typically an individual reports their intake over the previous 24-hour period. But here's the problem with that. Sean, what did you eat for breakfast yesterday?
I didn't eat breakfast yesterday, honestly.
Okay, good answer. Allie, what did you eat for breakfast yesterday?
I had an egg and olive.
I think I had, right? Hook, line, and sinker. Thank you for saying that. Couldn't have played it better myself. I think I had. Just ponder that for a second, right? Think about everything you ate yesterday. Think about everything you ate last Tuesday. Can you do it? Can you do it accurately, right? Take into account every single morsel, every extra cookie that you grabbed, every extra Hershey Kiss. Did you sit there and weigh out all the little ketchup that you put on, right? So we miss a lot of details with this recall because, well, we can't remember everything. So a better way to do it is a dietary record. So we go through and actually record all the food that you eat on a daily basis as you go through and consume your food. So this way you're not mitigated to your memory. And so this is what you guys will ultimately be doing here, is going to be doing a dietary record. Not a dietary recall, a dietary record. Recording your food as you go through the day. And this is a great little kind of pro and con, advantages and disadvantages to both of these. Because there are. There's advantages to a dietary recall. There's also disadvantages. And vice versa. And so actually a lot of nutrition studies out there were typically done by dietary recall, this 24-hour recall. And about a year or two ago, they came out and basically said there's a lot of nutrition studies that we actually, the results are sort of void because we realize how inaccurate ultimately it sort of is. Because that's what it is. The disadvantage here, it relies on short-term memory. And it also may not reflect your typical intake. But now we look at your dietary record. The most important thing that I want to point out with the dietary record here is it does not rely on short-term memory. But here's one of the disadvantages. A person may alter their typical diet. And so I say this now. I'm going to be having you doing a food log. Do not change the food that you are eating. By default, the second you know that you need to write down everything that you eat, what happens? All of a sudden, those extra cookies don't look as good, right? Yeah, you laugh, right? You laugh. And I don't want to pick on my mother-in-law, but I did this morning, so I'll pick on her again. She's somebody who struggled with her weight her entire life. And she always contacts my wife saying, oh, honey, I need help with my diet. My wife always replies back, all right, send me your food. And right away, everything cleans up. That accountability, right? She's embarrassed. She's embarrassed to write back to her and say, oh, I had cake for breakfast. Right? It's embarrassing because it's that accountability. This is why things like Weight Watchers are so popular and actually so good. There's just the accountability of actually plugging in and writing down everything that you're going to eat. All of a sudden, just by doing that, it changes. So in your food log, I'm not grading you on what you eat. I'm saying that right now. I do not grade you on the quality of your foods. I do not care if your entire diet is Lucky Charms. I don't care if your entire diet is just the marshmallows in Lucky Charms. Okay? This assignment is for you. I know the marshmallows are the best part, right? This assignment is for you to get an accurate assessment of ultimately what it is that you take in on a daily basis for your own benefit here. And so to do this, you guys are going to use myfitnesspal.com. I've already worked out the kinks. myfitnesspal.com. It works on PC. It works on Mac. It crosses all platforms. There should be no issues like we saw with EndNote here. It works great. And so there's a desktop version, which I like quite a bit. The desktop version is kind of just a little bit more user-friendly. But it also has, again, 21st century here, it also has the iPhone version and your tablet version. And actually the cool thing about the iPhone version is if you're at a store somewhere, and you have little barcode scanner type things, if you have a little box, you can just scan the barcode and it can magically populate the database. I love MyFitnessPal because the database is a robust database. Almost any food that you want is almost already in that database. I'm shocked every time I go to Trader Joe's, come home, I want to plug it into MyFitnessPal if I'm curious to see what I'm eating on a certain day. Without fail, 99% of the time, it's already in the database. So it's very robust. It's easy. It's a free account. You just sign up. You can go through and do it. The other thing I like about actually the app, the phone app or the tablet app, maybe you guys can figure out how to do this. I haven't figured it out yet. On the desktop version, I cannot get this. I cannot actually get a breakdown of my macronutrient composition. It's very simple math. I know as kinesiology majors, Martha, cover your ears, as kinesiology majors, we don't like math too much. I'm well aware of that. It's very simple math to figure out how many calories and percentage of calories you're getting from your proteins, from your carbohydrates, and your fat. I'll give you the conversions to how to do that. But I know a lot of students seem to struggle with that. So if you actually have the phone app, it'll give you this nice little pie chart breakdown to show you that you're taking in 37% of your calories from carbohydrate, or 34% from fat, or 29% protein. And part of the reason of having you do this before Holly Marshall comes is because when she comes to talk to you about different diets, when she says, hey, a ketogenic diet is a diet that contains anywhere between 80 to 90% of fat, now you'll have some understanding about what it is that you take in. Now you'll see, oh wow, I only take in 20% fat, or wow, I take in 50% fat. So then when you hear 90% fat, you'll say, whoa, that's a lot of fat, right? Because it is. It's almost all fat. 90% is almost all fat. And as part of this assignment as well, the other thing I'm going to have you do is use 2 different calculators out there. Because this happens to me all the time. And that's going to happen to you all the time as kinesiology majors. People will say, how many calories should I be taking in? Well, the gold standard is map it out, right? Hold yourself accountable, do at least a 3-day food log. That's what you're going to do. At least 3 days, 2 days during the week, and 1 weekend day is the best way to do it. Of course, more will be better. If you're really doing this with a nutritional client or something like that, you can do this for like 7 days. And you would hope, though, that over those 7 days, the person would be weight stable. If you record all your calories over 7 days and you lost weight, is that really your maintenance calories? No. If you recorded your calories over 7 days and you gained weight, is that your maintenance calories? No. So you'd have to figure out a period of time that you were able to take in a certain amount of calories and your weight was stable. And we know that's how many calories you need just to maintain your weight. That's how many calories you expend to take into account your basal metabolic rate, to take in your physical activity, and to account for that thermic effect of feeding. The calories that are actually expended as you consume food. But there are estimates out there. There are calculators out there. You can go and plug in. You can plug in your height, your weight, your activity level. And it gives you some rough estimate. And I'm always intrigued by these things. I'm always intrigued because of how far off they always seem to be. Yet they're out there. And this is what people go and plug their information in. And I hear all the time people say, oh, yeah, I ask them, how many calories are you eating? They say, oh, not as much as I need to. What do you mean? How do you know how much you're supposed to? Well, I plugged it into some calculator. It told me I should be taking in 26,000 calories a day. Excuse me? Right? But these are the calculators that are out there. And so I'm always curious to see your reactions and see how close you guys get. So this is one. This is nutritiondata.com. The link will be in the assignment. You'll click on it, plug in your information, and it'll give you an estimate of how many calories you should be taking in just to maintain weight. The other one out there, this one is very commonly used in the dietetics world. It's the Harris-Benedict equation. And so this actually takes into account that equation. So you can see anything, you plug in your age, height, weight, and so on and so forth. And it just gives you another estimate about how many calories you should be taking in on a daily basis. And so just real quickly here, I just want to show you what the nutritional assignment will actually entail. And so I've actually already uploaded this onto Moodle. And so this is going to be due on the 24th. So again, the day before Holly comes. So in class, you'll print it off and hand it in to me. And this way you have some understanding about what it is that you take in. So when she talks about these different diets, you'll have that greater understanding. And so here already on the Moodle page, class assignments, you'll see the nutrition log critique assignment. I'll bring this up in a second. It's just a Word document that you'll actually type your answers into. And I've actually already provided for you 2 examples of 2 students who got an A on this assignment last semester. So you can sort of see the detail, the level of detail that I'm looking for in this assignment. The first person, you'll see, she was meticulous. I mean, this woman weighed out every gram of everything that she ate. I loved it. Absolutely great. Immaculate diet. She puts my diet to shame. Like, I looked at this, I thought, boy, I need to clean up my diet a little bit. This is just one example. Again, I'm not judging you upon what you consume. I'm looking at the accuracy. So that's just one example. The other student that you'll see, you can basically see, not as accurate, not as meticulous, but yet still very accurate though. I can still see that she weighed everything out as she went through it. And for 3 days, and as you can see right here, one day she didn't consume much, and all of a sudden, out of these 1,700 calories, guess how many calories were in this McDonald's meal right here? There was almost 800 calories. One little McDonald's meal. All she had were some chicken nuggets and a salad. 800 calories. Pretty crazy, right? Pretty absolutely crazy. And so to do this assignment, this is actually the link that I have on your syllabus, just a little food scale. So the food scale, again, 11 pound capacity, $10-12, great investment for the rest of your life to have. And when you do this, and I love that they actually had a bowl of Lucky Charms up here, or Fruit Loops, or whatever the cereal may be. When you do this, I don't want you to do this in reverse. I don't want you to put the bowl on there and measure out one serving. I want you to put the bowl on there that you typically use, and then pour in what it is that you typically would eat, right? I want you to figure out how many calories do you take in on a daily basis. I want you to have that peanut butter epiphany. I always talk about the peanut butter epiphany, the epiphany realizing that if you look at a jar of peanut butter, it says the serving size is 2 tablespoons. So as a high school wrestler, I love peanut butter, and I always thought, I was taking in 2 tablespoons, unbeknownst to me that my 1 tablespoon was like 4 tablespoons. Once I finally took it out and put it on the scale, I realized, wow, that's way more peanut butter than I should be taking in. Maybe this isn't why I'm losing weight. I want you guys to have that same sort of experience. Peanut butter is a bad one, and cheese. The amount of students I had last semester realized, I didn't realize how many calories from cheese I was taking in. Didn't realize what 1 ounce of cheese actually looks like. Just as a rule of thumb, about an ounce of cheese looks like 2 dice put together. But you'll kind of get the experience. Oh, I saw that face right there, see? That's the reaction I'm looking for. So it's for your benefit to kind of go through this exercise as you do it. And so this is it. So this is the Word document. You got a whole host of information here on the front part of it. Please read through that. And this kind of gives you just some tips and tricks about how to figure out different caloric breakdown. These are the different conversions here, because I'm actually going to be looking for the percentage of calories that you get from carbohydrates, from fat, from protein, and these are the conversion factors that'll be on there listed for you. Here's the link to the one calculator, and then here's a link to the second calculator that I just showed you in the slides there. And then basically you're going to print these sheets off, and you'll type in your answers on them. And so basically what I'm looking for here is things like your BMI, the estimate of your daily energy expenditure. And on that first website, it'll actually give you some recommendations for what you should be taking in regards to carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And it gives you ranges, because that's actually what the nutritional guidelines give you. If you look at a nutritional textbook, you're going to see these guidelines. There is no answer of how much protein should I take in. You're going to see a range of, well, you should take in anywhere between 10 to 35% of your calories from protein. But I want you to find those values, and they're on that website there as you scroll through. And then this is where you'll put down your second estimate of your energy expenditure from the second website, and you'll see how close are those things ultimately. And then you actually report the 3 days of your caloric intake, how many calories you took in, and then how many grams of the macronutrients, your proteins, your carbohydrates, your fat, and then the percentages here. And I put this caveat, carefully calculate this or use the iPhone app. So many students last semester did not calculate this appropriately. So I'm telling you, be careful when you calculate it or cheat. It's not cheating. Use the app. It gives you the pie chart breakdown so you can actually accurately report those sorts of things. So 3 days you'll do this. Again, 3 days, 2 days being during the week, 1 day being a weekend day. This will be due after spring break, but I encourage you, if you can, do it this week or do it the week you get back. Because probably spring break won't be the most accurate representation of what you're eating, right? Spring break's probably going to be weird. You're not going to have your typical schedule. So again, try to make this most beneficial for you. And the last part is just a little bit of a self-reflection. 4 questions. Just kind of asking you, hey, how close were your calories to those estimates? Both estimates. And then also asking about how many calories you took in, and are you okay with that? Is there anything that you want to change? Just a little bit of a self-reflection. Again, please type your answers or print those off and then hand those in to me on the 24th. Any questions on that before I go forward? Yeah, Morgan.
Well, like when measuring your food, like you said, the peanut butter, like that's kind of hard to like put in a bowl. You know what I mean?
And so this is where you need to use a little ingenuity, right? A little ingenuity. Best way to do it for peanut butter, you take your spoon, you put it on the scale, you tear it out, take your spoon off your peanut butter, and you put it back on the scale. And that tells you exactly how many grams ultimately you took in right there. I know last semester some of the students asked about eating out. Oh, what if I eat out? You know what? Honestly, be that weirdo, right? I'm asking you to do this one time. One time is all I'm asking you to do this. You laugh, but seriously. Or do takeout, right? If you're embarrassed to do this at a restaurant, get takeout. Bring the food home. Weigh it. Go to your favorite restaurant. Oh yeah, every week I get the grilled chicken thing from this place and this place. Okay, good. Bring the grilled chicken home and weigh it. See how many ounces of chicken they actually give you. See how many ounces of rice they give you. And you'll be pretty shocked about how many calories are probably contained within that one meal. Jonathan?
So do you just have to like weigh everything like individually, or like as like a whole?
Yeah, you pretty much would have to weigh everything individually. Exactly. Yeah. So
Like,
you're,
if you like a half a plate of fries, but like each fry and then add it up.
if you know about how many fries you typically eat, yeah, take your plate, get your fries, plop it on, get a measurement. Exactly. I know, it's a pain, right? I'm just gonna do this one time. 3 days, that's all it is.
So we can pick any 3 days over the next week we want.
Exactly.
Or one has to be a week or a weekend.
One should be a weekend, and the two should be weekdays. That gives us a pretty accurate representation of what you eat on a week schedule.
So if we're using the app, so that some of the foods are already like in there, say if we go to a restaurant or something, so do we still have to weigh it, or is that already calculated in the database?
Good question. And if I were you, I would double check it. I would definitely double check it. If it gives you some sort of estimate, if it says, hey, a typical standard size of French fries from this restaurant, it says it's 60 grams, weigh it. Say, hey, is it 60 grams? And I know sometimes a lot of the foods, especially if you eat here at the cafeteria, those are things that are going to be in the database. And so in that database, you'll find things that'll say generic. It'll say generic cheeseburger, or it might say generic chicken breast. And so those sorts of things will give you some pretty good accurate representations of what the food should be. Any other questions? Yeah, Nicole.
Okay, this seems really stupid, but what if you like ordered a salad, for example? So, like, would I have to like take everything out individually, just? Like,
You can get a pretty good estimate about what's in there. You know, it's still very, you know, salad. And this is the thing. Things like salad, it's interesting, right? You get this big old salad. It's kind of like, well, how many calories are in this? I get this huge bowl of romaine lettuce. How many calories are in my romaine lettuce? Well, dump it into a bowl and weigh it out. And then go and plug it into the nutrition calculator. Go to figure out, wow, 50 grams of romaine lettuce. Look at that. It's got 5 calories, right? Learn about these sorts of things. These are things that I'm trying to force you to learn. It's a good learning experience.
I kind of understand, which I've kind of had this question, like you go to a restaurant and order a salad, do you take apart?
I will let you use your discretion.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I don't know what you eat. I can't follow each of you around for those 3 days to actually figure it out. Again, I want you to kind of get the most accurate representation of your diet that you can, so that you can really kind of see how many calories am I really taking in. Because there's hidden things in salads that you don't realize. When I showed you that little picture of McDonald's that she ate her meal, it was the chicken nuggets in the salad. I don't know if you saw that. 200 calories came from just the dressing alone. She had ranch dressing on her salad. 200 calories for a pack. So if you didn't take that into account, if you just said I had a salad, well, yeah, that one salad could have had 50 calories or it could have had 250 based upon that little extra ingredient. So each ingredient, and maybe you know which ingredients have calories and which ones don't. But I saw some eyebrows go up when I said that to realize, whoa, things like oil and these dressings and condiments, those have a lot of different calories in them. So yeah, weighing those out would be a pretty eye-opening experience for a lot of you.
Do we have to do like beverages too? Like how would we do it?
You bet your bottom dollar you do. Yeah. I showed 2,000 calories up there from Burger King, right? Guess what was in that 2,000 calories? A big, large soda. Because 1 can of soda, 200 calories right there. Michael Phelps, I just showed you, right? Takes in 2,000 calories on his day from just sodas. 2,000 calories. The amount of calories that you take in on a daily basis, he takes in just beverages. So you better take into account those things. I did. I had one student last semester, he had a good drinking day on a weekend. That's what he did every weekend, right? So he had 2 days, he was like 2,000 calories, and then Saturday came, went out, had some beers, he was at like 6,000 calories. I don't care. I'm not judging you about what you take in, right? I want you to actually take into account for yourself. Wow, that's how many calories are in a beer. That's how many calories are in XYZ mixed drink. Okay? It's a fun assignment. It's a lot of fun. I enjoy reading it. I get to check a lot of it. But I really hope that you guys get a good learning experience out of doing it. And these are just some other websites that'll help you out. So this is just a link. This will be in the slides that I'll post on Moodle for you. So MyFitnessPal, you can click on that. This is at nutritiondata.com. And this is another one as well, calorieking.com. They have a good app as well. Just kind of look some different things up. Sometimes you may be out and you want to figure out, hey, how many calories are in this? It's a pretty good repository of information now out there to try and figure out those sorts of things. All right. So switching gears here for the last about 15 minutes or so, give you a quick little history lesson about nutrition and kind of where we're going in the field of nutrition, where we've been, and then what's going to be upon the future here. And so when we look at nutrition, as we alluded to before, we sort of have the health side of nutrition, and then we have that sports performance side of nutrition. So we look at the health side, some of the early influences was trying to figure out what minerals or what nutrients are actually important to us. So as I'll show you in a couple slides coming up here, we have what we deem about 45 essential nutrients. We break down into those 6 different categories. There's macronutrients, the micronutrients, and the water. But there was a point in time, believe it or not, that we didn't realize they were essential. We had to actually go through experiments to figure these sorts of things out. And for a lot of these, we learned it sort of backwards. We realized people were sick, people had diseases, and we realized, oh, it's because they weren't having X, Y, and Z. There was a point in time where we had things like scurvy. And then all of a sudden we started to realize, oh wow, we can actually prevent scurvy by giving people vitamin C. You don't realize this, that there was a point in time that you didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables year-round. You take it for granted because you live here in California, where basically you guys are the breadbasket of the world. All the foods that you grow here get shipped out everywhere. It's the middle of winter back where I'm come from, and we don't have fresh strawberries at the farmer's market, but yet you have that here. Back in Christopher Columbus's day, they hopped on a ship and they sailed for months and months on end, eating nothing but bread and meat. They didn't have fresh fruits and vegetables. So guess what happened? They got sick, they got scurvy. They didn't have vitamin C. So it's things like that that we realize, wow, things like vitamins are actually pretty important to prevent things like scurvy. Minerals, like iron. We started to realize that people didn't have enough iron in the system, became anemic. So how to fix that? We gave iron supplements. We gave them a diet rich in iron foods, more meat, and things like that. And also even protein intake. Protein intake is sort of the hot topic in the nutrition world. Everything's all about protein, protein, protein. So there was a point in time that we didn't realize the importance of protein. And actually it was animal research that figured it out. There's investigators back in the day that they gave dogs a diet of just carbohydrates and just fat. And guess what happened to those dogs? They passed away pretty quickly. They didn't survive more than a couple weeks. So they realized, wow, they're missing some vital nutrient. Well, what's that vital nutrient? It's protein. And once they gave them the protein, once they gave them those essential amino acids, essential because your body needs them. It can't create them on its own. They're able to live and flourish. Back in the early 1900s as well, around 1920, we actually figured out ways to actually measure your energy expenditure, to actually accurately quantify how many calories you burn on a daily basis. That's where all those estimates come from. When you plug all your stuff into those calculators, that was from years and years of data, where we took people, we measured their basic metabolic rate, we put a little hood on them, we measured their gas exchange, and we can actually figure out how many calories are they burning on a daily basis. And then we can do some mathematical modeling to figure out, hey, people who are typically this height and this weight and this age and this gender, this is typically what they expend on a daily basis just to sit there and breathe. So that's a pretty big turning point in the world of health and nutrition. And some of the more recent influences, we have a whole host of epidemiological data. Epidemiological data basically being data that's derived from these big longitudinal studies where we go and we find populations out there and we track what they eat and we track what diseases they get over a whole slew of years. And so these are some massive conglomerates of data that are out there that we can go back and look to see, hey, there's this massive population and there seems to be this massive increase in breast cancer in all these individuals. So let's go back and figure out what foods are they eating that may be leading to that, or what foods are the other people eating that's preventing that. So we can go through and parse through all that data to try and figure out some of these trends. Now it's not causation. We can't do a cause and effect from those sorts of things, but we can look at trends and get some incidences and some indices about what's going on. And also the formation of the ADA, the American Dietetics Association. So that's basically with a registered dietitian. If you become a registered dietitian, the RD, all the licensure goes through the ADA. And the ADA has played a pretty big role in actually establishing the nutritional guidelines for America. We won't talk about that today, we don't have enough time, but in our next lecture we'll talk about some of the changes that have actually occurred in the nutritional guidelines. So nutritional guidelines like the food pyramid, you guys have probably seen that when you were younger. And what was at the base of that food pyramid? Good old school food pyramid, what's at the base of it? Grains, right? Carbohydrates. Long ago, that was the mantra. We've changed the food pyramid a couple different times, and the new food guidelines were actually just released. These are like hot off the presses. So basically at the end of last year, so December 2015 and beginning of this year, January 2016, the 2015 to 2020 Dietary Nutrition Guidelines just came out. And it was actually pretty controversial because they finally just dropped the recommendations for cholesterol intake, something that's been in the population, in the guidelines for a number of years. And now we're starting to re-look at our saturated fat intakes as well. So right now in another class that I'm teaching, which is Kin 217, I'm actually teaching nutrition right now. So in that course, we really kind of go into more of the nitty-gritty about what foods you should eat and not eat. We don't have time to go into that in this class. But it's interesting though, because I was going through these guidelines with them, and I was saying, guess what? Saturated fat is not the villain that we used to think it was. And we're finally starting to see that getting put into textbooks and put out into the population. I can show you some headlines showing that. So after class, when the kids are walking by, and he goes, you know, I finally thought we were talking about a topic today that I knew everything about, nutrition. He said, you just blew my mind. I said, I know. The nutrition world has been turned upside on its head pretty recently. And we're not focusing so much on carbohydrates. We're starting to focus more on fats. And actually starting to realize we need all these different types of fats, and saturated fat isn't the villain that we used to think it is. But we'll stay tuned for that coming up in the next lecture as well. So those were the influences in regards to health. But now we can look at some of the influences in regards to sport. And so these can go back to ancient times here. So this, your book talks about historical recordings from around 500 to 400 BC. 500 to 400 BC, before Christ, right? We're talking a long, long time ago. We have evidence of individuals manipulating their diet to maximize their performance. So way back then, they found that consumption of deer liver and lion heart would enhance bravery, speed, and strength in athletes. So hopefully you guys have seen The Wizard of Oz. I see Martha laughing, so maybe many people haven't seen The Wizard of Oz. But the Cowardly Lion, he didn't have enough bravery. So maybe if he had a little bit more deer liver or a lion heart, he'd be a little bit more brave and strong. Interestingly enough, though, as much as I'm joking about it, we're actually starting to see in the past 5 or 10 years a pretty big shift in people actually eating a lot more organ meats. People are actually starting to eat a lot more liver, a lot more heart, a lot more kidney. Do you know why? This wasn't as anecdotal as we thought. It sounds silly, right? What do you think's in those organ meats? Are they tasty? When you have liver and onion?
They're cheap.
They're cheap. They are cheap. Yeah. They're nutritional powerhouses. There's tons of vitamins and minerals in those things. They're typically pretty low in fat. They're usually pretty high in protein, and they are packed with micronutrients. As I was joking about before, so I did my undergrad. I got a minor in nutrition. I went through all these different nutrition courses, and the first week of every nutrition course, it was always memorize all the vitamins, memorize all the minerals, and figure out sources of where each of those are from. At the end of the day, if there was ever a mineral or vitamin that you couldn't remember where a good source of it was, the joke was just say liver. And guess what? You're pretty much always right. Because liver just has that many vitamins and minerals in it. And we're starting to realize that, and that's why a lot of people are starting to put these back into their diet. And some of the other influences was figuring out the importance of carbohydrates to actually maximize our performance. You guys take it for granted that when we talk about before your soccer game, what do? You had the pasta night, right? Or before a big race, you go and carb up. Well, there's a point in time we didn't realize the importance of actually carbohydrates to performance. So basically back in the 1920s, 1924 Boston Marathon, some researchers actually measured the blood glucose levels of individuals who crossed the finish line, the top 20. And their blood glucose levels are actually deemed diagnosable hypoglycemia, low blood sugar. And there's a lot of maleffects to having low blood sugar. And a lot of it is people passing out, stupor, not having enough diligence to actually adequately get themselves across the finish line. And so then the next year, they actually did a little bit of a nutritional intervention to prevent that. They gave them carbohydrates the day before, and they also gave them sugar, candy, during the race. It sounds crazy, but there's a point in time where people would go out and run marathons without actually having any sort of nutritional provision. Now it's almost standard. You see people running a marathon, and what are they doing? Drinking Gatorade the whole time. What's in Gatorade? Sugar. A lot of times they give them soda now. What's in soda? Sugar. It's almost taken for granted that we give them these sorts of things as they go through, but there's a point in time that we didn't realize that you actually need carbohydrates. Carbohydrates can actually maximize your performance in some of these extended endurance events. And also the importance of consuming protein. First protein supplements were actually created not that long ago, 1970s. 1970s is when the first protein supplements came out. You wouldn't think it, because protein supplements are everywhere, right? You get your vitamin shops, your GNC, you go to Walmart and CVS, they get their own line of protein supplements now, they're everywhere. There was a point in time, though, that they actually didn't have those sorts of things. And a major influence, I know you guys have seen this slide already a couple times, talking about the muscle biopsy. The muscle biopsy got first pioneered back in 1960 by some Swedes. The muscle biopsy being where they can actually go in and take out a piece of muscle tissue and we can do some analysis. So some of the analysis that we could actually do on a muscle biopsy was actually measure things like muscle glycogen. And what's muscle glycogen? Muscle glycogen is basically the storage form of glucose within your skeletal muscle. So we didn't realize the effect that nutrition has on our glycogen content until we can actually take a piece of muscle and figure out how much glycogen is in it. So now all of a sudden we can take people and we can manipulate their diet. I can give somebody a high carbohydrate diet and look to see how much carbohydrate, how much glycogen is in that muscle. I can have somebody go and do an exercise bout, see how much glycogen was depleted, and then give them different foodstuffs, different amounts of carbohydrate to see, hey, how quickly does that recover? These are major turning points in the world of nutrition. And lastly, we've also seen over the past couple of years, especially the last couple of decades, different performance-enhancing compounds, supplements, ergogenic aids. Different than ergonomics, where your guest speaker came in and talked about optimal position sitting at your desk, talking about ergogenic aids, things that can actually improve your performance, maximize performance. Things like creatine monohydrate, beta-alanine, sodium bicarbonate, beetroot juice. These are all things that now top athletes are taking because they're quote-unquote legal. They're legal because they're not performance-enhancing drugs, which is a whole other area that is coming to fruition as well. They're seeing all these top athletes doing things like that. And yeah, taking performance-enhancing drugs is going to actually definitely affect the nutritional provision that you're going to need. As you saw before, Juan Morel, probably if he wasn't on performance-enhancing drugs, he probably wouldn't need 20,000 calories a day. But that's what we're seeing in different sports that are out there. And you're very naive to think that let me put this up in an appropriate way, because I was talking to a friend of mine about this. I was asking him about in the sport of CrossFit. So if you guys know about the CrossFit Games, it's coming up. Basically, the big open going on right now. I kind of asked him the question. I said, hey, these guys are, their physical specimens are just insane. It's amazing what these guys can actually do. And so I posed the question to him. I say, are they taking stuff? Like, what do you think? Be honest with me. What do you think? And this is a gentleman who actually sort of race cycles at a pretty high level. And he actually realized at that time, he goes, I used to race cycles. I was pretty high level. I could just never get to that top echelon. Unbeknownst to him, 10 years after the fact, it turns out that all the guys who were beating him were all doing blood doping. It was one of those things. And so he kind of made that comment. He kind of said, I'm always skeptical. I'm always skeptical that when you see some of these athletes who are at these top levels, especially in new sports where there aren't a lot of regulations, it's competition. And there's money associated with the competition. So it can be very naive to think that there are individuals out there who are trying to maximize their performance. And again, if it's not illegal, if there are no negative ramifications at this point in time in those sports, you're very naive to think that people are not doing those sorts of things. So there's something to think about as you go on and go forward. I think on that, we'll actually stop because that's a good starting point.